my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable unto you, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Please be seated. We are approaching the central mystery. We are approaching the mystery of the crucifixion, resurrection, and the power of salvation in the world. This is another mystery that we can express in words. Jesus uses the metaphor of a grain of wheat that falls to the earth and produces a crop. The epistle for today uses the metaphor of a high priest, the mediator between the people and God. And in our calendar today, we also have a commemoration of St. Patrick of Ireland. And I want to approach the mystery of salvation today through the story of Patrick. Patrick was in the late 4th century, early 5th century Romano Britain. He was a youth. His father and grandfather were Roman citizens, and his grandfather was a Catholic priest. And when Patrick was a teenager, he was kidnapped by a crew from Ireland who came and to take slaves. Ireland at the time had an economy based on animal husbandry and slavery. The so-called kings, which we would call more sort of gang leaders perhaps, had vast flocks of sheep. And young Patrick was set to work as a shepherd. His memory of those years was of nakedness and of hunger. For 6 years, he was a shepherd as a slave. And what he chose to do in those years was learn to pray. He said he prayed day and night. And eventually, he started hearing a voice said, "Your ship is waiting. Get up and go." And he obeyed. And he miraculously made his way to the coast. And the crew or the captain of a ship was persuaded to allow him to board. He kept praying. He kept praying when he came back home. And eventually he heard a voice and he started seeing visions. He saw a vision of a man that he had known in Ireland holding a text out to him that said, "The voice of Ireland." He heard a voice saying, "Go back, bring my word to the people of Ireland. The one who died for you is the one telling you this." There were obstacles in the way of Patrick going to Ireland as a Christian missionary. His schooling had been interrupted by his kidnapping. He did not have the kind of education that made the school for priesthood easy for him. But he persevered and went back to Ireland, expecting death, terrified. Think, going back to the place where he had been a slave, where he had been hungry and naked. But Jesus, you might remember, said something about loving your enemies. And there is tremendous power in taking that fear and turning it into love. And it's not something that Patrick did himself. This was something he did only through prayer. This is something that God was using Patrick for. At the time, Ireland had a collection of gods that were frankly more like something out of nightmares. They are depicted with severed heads, and the people sacrificed human beings to them. And they put their skulls in niches dedicated to the gods. And Patrick brought word of a different God to the people of Ireland. And he said, you do not have to sacrifice yourselves because Jesus was the one perfect sacrifice. So this is one way in which God took something evil, took the practice of slavery, and took another thing that was evil, of the practice of crucifixion, and transmuted them into salvation and love. When I was in graduate school, for a time I studied Aikido. And I don't know if you know Aikido. I was told it's the one martial art which is entirely defensive. It cannot be used for offensive purposes. Because what it does is it takes the energy of the attacker, and that's the energy it uses. My teacher could take a full-grown person attacking him, and with 2 fingers, divert that energy so that the person fell over his shoulder. It uses the power that's called chi, of the energy in movement. And you know, that's my metaphor, my personal metaphor for Jesus and the crucifixion. That God took all of the might of the Roman Empire and took all of the cruelty of this public execution in the crucifixion and just neutralized it, diverted it into a power of salvation, into a power of love, into a power for good. And sometimes, as with Patrick, we can see the result of a life of prayer and obedience, where we can see that power of love, that power of transmutation at work to change the world. It isn't something human beings do on their own. It's something that they do in prayer and listening to God. It's something that is captured for us in the hymn we call St. Patrick's Breastplate, which is in our hymnal number 370. I bind unto myself today the strong name of the Trinity by invocation of the same, the three in one and one in three. I bind this day to me forever by power of faith, Christ's incarnation, his baptism in the Jordan River, his death on the cross for my salvation, his bursting from the spiced tomb, his riding up the heavenly way, his coming at the day of doom, I bind unto myself today. Christ be with me, Christ within me, Christ behind me, Christ before me, Christ beside me, Christ to win me, Christ to comfort and restore me. May you take these words as your own in whatever pain and storms of life your life has for you, and see the transmutation of salvation.